We're going to talk about organizational ethics and why they're so important. And to do that, we have a very special guest, Dr. Ryan Beisel. So let's get into the details. Hey there, Alex Lyon. Welcome back to the channel. Today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Ryan Beisel. He is a professor at the University of Oklahoma. He studies organizational communication, and also he has a special focus on leadership, morals, and ethics. And so he is the perfect person to come and talk to us about this topic, organizational ethics. And in fact, he wrote a book about organizational moral learning. And this is actually the second video in a two-part series. In that first video, we talked about what are organizational ethics and morals and looking at comparing and contrasting the similarities and differences. So I encourage you to go take a look at that video when you're done with this one. I will put a link to that in the description below. And you can find his book on Amazon. I will also put a link to his book in the description below. Feel free to check it out. So Ryan, welcome back to the channel. Good to have you on again.
Thanks, Alex. Good to be back.
I'm really excited today because we're just getting deeper and deeper into your particular area of expertise. So let's start with the big question. What are organizational ethics?
Yes, great. So let's just start with ethics first. Ethics refers to widely shared standards of right conduct. They're widely shared standards of right conduct. And so organizational ethics then is widely shared standards of right conduct in the workplace setting. And of course, very important topic.
And so why do organizational ethics matter?
Yeah, organizational ethics matter because without standards of right conduct, organizations can hurt people, their employees and customers, the environment as well. That list goes on and on. You know, without strong organizational ethics, of course, organizations run the risk of hurting their reputations, not just people, but hurting themselves. I mean, fact of the matter is, with poor organizational ethics, organizations run the risks of undoing themselves, downright failing. A classic example of this, of course, would be Enron during 2000s. Enron was doing a lot of unscrupulous accounting practices, which were eventually caught. And of course, Enron eventually folded, and lots of people were devastated because of it. It's just a really sad story. You know that. Furthermore, it's not just that bad ethics hurt; it's that good ethics help. There's some fascinating studies of the fact that, at least in the long run, you might say virtuous organizations do tend to do quite well. A study in right after 9/11 of some of the U.S. airlines. Of course, people weren't flying as much after 9/11. There was some constriction of the airline industry. And there was a study of how airline industry companies handled that. And what you find is where airlines did the right thing, where they were generous and compassionate and transparent with employees, and 12 months later, they were doing well. A lot of airlines were not compassionate and transparent, and as a matter of fact, you saw that in their profits a year later. You saw it harm their profits. Now, I think it's important also when we talk about why do ethics matter. I mean, ethics matter also just say that they matter because they matter. It matters because doing the right thing is important. Full stop. We can do it just for its own good, and we're right to do so.
Yeah, I love that. They're just the right thing to do. I have an expression that I talk about in workshops and also in my college classes, is that good ethics is good business. Mm-hmm. They're one and the same. When organizations are doing unethical things, it harms their organization. It harms their bottom line. And when they're acting well, when they're behaving ethically, it helps their business grow and thrive. So they're one and the same. It's not like, ethics are off to the side. It's central to what organizations do. But nevertheless, as you mentioned, they don't always do well. It seems like organizations are always in the news. Their leaders are often in the news for doing and getting caught doing unethical things, even criminal activity. Mm-hmm. So what does the research in organizational communication offer? What kind of explanations do we have for that?
Yeah, great question. It's absolutely true. As we read the news, we just see organizations behaving badly, even criminally, all over the place. And organizational communication research provides some interesting insights into why that might be. Now, one idea is that there exists what's called a moral mum effect. A moral mum effect in the workplace. Now, a moral mum effect basically refers to this idea that organizational members have a tendency to avoid labeling unethical behavior as unethical. They might privately have concerns, but they don't tend to publicly discuss those concerns. And then that can kick off a series of other problematic communication dynamics. We don't speak up about private ethical concerns because we think that ethics talk, or what I call here and now ethics talk, it's just out of bounds for the workplace. It doesn't belong in the workplace. We just don't like to talk that way. And of course, that's even besides the silencing power of power. Where people are, of course, are concerned about retribution and what would happen if they do bring up a concern that they might have.
Yeah, really hard to talk about. Much easier to talk about, oh, we lost money last quarter.
Right.
Much harder to talk about, hey, that was a moral failing on your part. So how do we know that?
Or my part. Yeah.
Right. Or my part.
Yes,
how do I
to make it very personal? Yeah.
Yeah. How do I talk about my own problems? Mm-hmm. So it's super interesting research. I read some of your research, but how do we know the moral mum effect is common in organizations?
Yes, great. And this is where the research can really help us. So in communication, what we will often do in order to demonstrate this is rely on experiments. And what you do is you put people in a situation, a scenario, and you see how they communicate. And so imagine yourself in this kind of scenario. I'll give you a flavor for what that seems like. So imagine that you're a bookkeeper of a company, okay? And your coworker asks you to write a check from company funds to reimburse them for their own personal computer. Now, this request is unethical. It's a violation of the wage policy. There wouldn't even be discretionary funds after this for the rest of the month if you did it. Now, respond to your coworker as though this were a real situation. And so we put people in scenarios like that. And one of the key things that we do is we then ask them privately, okay, so was that request unethical? And we absolutely confirm that, yeah, that was unethical of my coworker to ask me. But then we go ahead and code what they say. Now, we now have several data sets of hundreds of working adults. And here's what we find. Despite the fact that 100% of these working adults says that request was unethical, only a fraction, only 10% ever deny the request on ethical grounds. I mean, they did not deny the request. They might say, oh, I can't do that, or there's an operational reason why I can't do that. Or maybe there's a policy, but they don't bring up ethics. They don't say, I can't do that because that seems wrong or not right, or that would be against my integrity or my conscience. We don't talk that way because we've been socialized to say that doesn't belong in the workplace. And that's a problem, because if we can't talk that way, how can we think that way together? And so that's what's important.
Yeah, really hard to talk about those kinds of issues, even when we know personally that's not ethical. That's not the right way to go. But how do I say something about it? It's like we lack the vocabulary. So what's the big deal with the moral mum effect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big deals with the moral mum effect is the more we understand how pervasive this issue is in the workplace, that people, they might privately have a concern, but they don't publicly discuss it. And then we start the clock a little bit. We start thinking, well, what's the implication of that over time? We start to have some interesting realizations. Now, if people can't or won't talk ethics in the here and now, it'll be hard for them to catch ethical concerns or problems while those problems are still small and resolvable. And that can be a huge thing, where if issues are allowed to go on, people might privately have concerns, but they look around and nobody else is talking that way. And then that might lead them to believe over time, oh, maybe I'm alone here, and maybe that's silly of me. This is just the way business is done. This is just the way it works. And so then you get that gradual, incremental step down. Unfortunately, you get rationalizations, self-deceptions, or group self-deceptions. And it's, in other words, then you get ethical problems and private ethical concerns. They go unaddressed. They begin to fester and grow, unfortunately, until they become intractable. They become impossible to address.
Yeah, huge. They grow in the dark, right? They become extremely harmful,
Hmm.
extremely expensive to rectify when we don't address them early. And then by the time it eventually becomes public knowledge, which it almost always does, it's
It
very hard
will.
to keep, very hard nowadays to keep any secrets. And especially in corporations, people will post things on social media eventually and it'll get out. And then you have to pay, sometimes 10 times the amount of money. It's caused 10 times the amount of harm. We've seen case after case in the news where people knew about this stuff
Yes,
and they
that's
did
a
not
common
address it.
theme. Somebody knew. Yes.
So when they know, let's transition now to these 5 steps that I want to talk about, that you want to talk about.
Yeah.
And that is, what can we do to combat the moral mom effect? You have 5 steps, so let's walk through them. Number 1, speak by example. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think for the people who care about ethics in the workplace, leaders and aspiring leaders out there, I want you to not just lead by example. I want you to speak by example. Use language like integrity and ethics, right and wrong, and go ahead and use that language. The research is showing that when bosses use that kind of plain but ethically charged language, it helps everybody else say, "Oh, okay, I can talk that way." And it can be a really powerful way in which we speak by example. We say, "This is what I care about. Talk to me about it because this is an important value to us." Yeah.
So you use those labels, which is funny because we're told, oh, labels are bad. But when you see something unethical, something immoral, it's a moment where you pop that bubble of silence and you say, that's wrong. And then everybody goes, hey, look, the world didn't end. Someone said it was wrong. And now, like you said, now it's discussable. We can talk about right and wrong. Number two,
Exactly.
avoid excessively philosophical language. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that people avoid ethics talk is because it might feel like too fuzzy, philosophical, or religious. And the fact of the matter is, not everybody needs to be a philosopher. We can all just take a deep breath here. There really are ethical dilemmas and puzzles, but for the most part, we know we shouldn't steal. We know we shouldn't harm people, and everybody, for the most part, a lot of us agree with that. So just be comfortable and confident in that fact. And what we want to do is we want to focus on the realization that for the most part, people have private ethical judgments. They already have them. They're already there. And so can we just have the conversation, be mindful, and try to adapt our work and pursue ethical excellence, work towards moving the conversation from is this right or wrong only to how can we be better today? How can we keep doing work with increasing amount of integrity and where something we can be proud of. So we're going to avoid that philosophical language where possible because we want to hear from people and we don't want to end up excluding voices when people feel like, oh, I can't really participate in high philosophy, discourse with you. Say, hey, don't worry about that. Let's just tell me what you think and where are you? And then let's have the conversation. Yeah.
Great. Number 3, talk about what the body knows. What does that mean?
This is sort of an interesting realization that the research is pointing to, and that's when, and it's related to the first two really. When we make a habit of talking about the body and what the body knows, for example, hey, follow your heart, or what's our heart telling us here? What's our gut telling us here? What do we know to be true in our bones? What do we know to be really valuable in our bones? All of those kinds of uses, descriptions of the body, believe it or not, helps people feel more calm and more willing to have here and now ethics talk, because I think what's happening there is they do trust some of those signals they're getting from their body, and they feel like they can reference those maybe easier than they can engage in some sort of philosophical discourse or religious debate. That's not where we need to go necessarily. We can actually have a lot of conversation where we just sort of reference, hey, this is the way I'm feeling, and it's going to open some of those doors for us to be able to have a authentic moral dialogue.
Yeah, we're going to feel it before we have the words, right?
Yes, we will.
I'm not going to say what it was. I remember years ago, I saw something happen at work, and I felt it like, oh, that's not right. But there's a distance there between feeling it and knowing in my body that it was not cool what I was witnessing and being able to talk about it. But you gotta trust that feeling that look, that's real. What you saw wasn't right. And that's the beginning of it, being able to have that conversation.
That's great.
Number 4, retell stories of heroes who spoke up. Tell us about that.
Yeah, for leaders and aspiring leaders out there, I want to encourage you to find examples of times in your past or in the team's past where somebody spoke up and really helped you all pursue ethical excellence, helped you pursue work with a lot of integrity, and tell those stories. They can be quick little stories, little reminders, and that begins to put people on notice that that's what we're looking for. That's really what we want. We don't want yes men and yes women. We want people who can help us be moral barometers as we move through, the complexity of work life sometimes. Organizational communication scholar, Dr. Jeff Kassing, he reminds us of an organization who described their, quote, guardian angels. And you would get guardian angel status if you were somebody who spoke up when the time was right with something we really needed to hear. And I think that's a wonderful way in which leaders can demonstrate that this is what they value. This is the kind of talk that they want from people.
Yeah, great. And then they hear that other people have done it who have come before them, and it makes the path forward much more clear for them when those heroes are being held up as the people to look up to and emulate. And number 5, build trusting relationships. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think this is really the backbone to all of it. When we build trusting relationships, that's really what helps people have the courage to talk this way and feel safe about talking this way. And we need to build those trusting relationships so that we can, we need to be humble and patient and loving towards people, but we need to also have this conversation because the alternative is silence. And that silence can be the source of a lot of festering problems. And so as we build trusting relationships, what does that look like? Sometimes that looks like just remembering people's kids' names or their grandkids' names, asking about their hobbies. Not 5 days out of 5 days a week, but enough to let people know, hey, we're approachable. We do care about you as an individual, and you can trust us. You can trust me to speak up and tell me what you really think. So building trusting relationships really is such a key. It's a foundation to all of this.
Wonderful. Those are 5 excellent steps to have the hard conversations about ethical questions, unethical activities, something that you might notice and not know how to begin that conversation. These 5 approaches are excellent. So thank you for unpacking that for us. So Ryan, thanks again for being on the channel. And I want to remind everybody that Ryan does have this book, Organizational Moral Learning, and that is available on Amazon. You can find the link in the description below. Feel free to check that out. Ryan, thanks for being on, man.
Thank you. Had a great time.
And until the next time, we'll see you all later. Take care.